Down and goal at the 8-yard line for the Badgers. Down by 6. Graham Mertz, the sophomore quarterback, drops back, floats it in the end zone, and it's intercepted. Brisker! Wow! Brisker! What a game!
A big shove coming from the middle. Daniel Suarez in the 99. He gets turned into the 4, and they go into the wall. The next flag will end the race.
By 5. Caution out.
And there is the caution flag. Ryan Blaney wins.
And Conforto slashes one the other way. Base hit! That ties the game! Alonso in. Baez digging for third. It's kicked by Almarola. Here comes Baez trying to score. He scores! And the Mets win it! Turn those thumbs around! Javi Baez races home with a winning run! And the Mets win it 6-5!
Hey everyone, and welcome to episode 68 of Sports Speak. Hope you're doing well. I'm Eddie Kalegi here with Zoe Alter. Tim Moore will be joining us in just a little bit. He and I will be breaking down the NASCAR playoff picture heading into the postseason this weekend, but we got a lot to get to with Zoe, of course. Baseball, it's September now. The pennant race is on. There was a big game between the Dodgers and Giants last night. The Mets trying to make somewhat of a push. The Yankees, after their 13-game win streak, are falling apart in the AL East. So a lot to get to there. NFL season just 5 days away. College football is back. But Zoe, since this is the first time you've been on since the Big Kids Cast, you got to broadcast a Sunday Night Baseball game as well as a Little League World Series game. I was hoping maybe you could tell us a little bit about that experience.
Of course. Well, Eddie, I think you know a little bit of what goes into that. Eddie and I did one 2 years ago. We did a Kids Cast. This Kids Cast looked a little bit different. There were a lot of COVID protocols. So it was a lot of what happened behind the scenes was masked up and talking to less people. And the crowd was like nothing. So it was weird to deal with that. But in terms of the experience, it was awesome. It always is. It's a great opportunity. This year we did an MLB game, which was different than other years. So we got to sit in a booth. Basically, where I was seated was like 10 feet away from A-Rod, and he ended up coming into our booth to switch. Mm-hmm. But it was weird because I would look to my right and be like, oh, hey, A-Rod, hey, like Sunday night crew. And it was a little weird just to be there. But it was also weird to be in a stadium, which, first of all, isn't really a major league stadium that they were playing in. It's a minor league stadium, but adjusted to, major league dimensions. And then in a stadium where the stands aren't packed and the only fans that are there are basically just little league kids. Mm-hmm. So it felt like a little league game, but they're but Mike Trout's in the dugout and Ohtani's on the field. So it was a little weird to grasp your head around, and there was a lot going on, but it was a complete blast. So much fun. I think my highlight was talking to Shohei Ohtani. And I got mocked for it because I asked him like the classic question, do you have games on your phone? Like I was like that kid, but it was just great because I was like the annoying kid on the bus who's like, do you have games on your phone? What games do you have? Can I play? But it was fun because it was like, what else would a kid ask him?
And let's be honest, Ohtani and his interpreter, that was probably the most excited they got the whole time.
No, literally.
Before he even, his interpreter even translated it, he knew what he'd been asking. He was ready to Clash Royale.
Yeah, exactly. There's like Clash Royale, and Ian was like, and then Ian tried to jump in. Ian was like, "Oh, I can do this." So I'm like, "Ian, this is my question." No, but it was fun. It was a lot of fun. And then there were like a bunch of articles written about it, and I wasn't really quoting any of them, but it was like Shohei Ohtani like FaceTimes the Kids Cast, and I was like, "I'm the one who you got that laughter from." Like it was a fun experience. It was really exciting. And then the Little League game that we had to do was like the longest Little League game in the history of whatever. And it was fine because we had just come off doing an MLB game 2 days prior. Mm-hmm. So even though 6 innings felt like 9, it was still all right because we just did a 9-inning game. Yeah. But it was less activity, which made it feel a lot longer. And there were so many errors. It was crazy. It was the highest scoring game of this year in the Little League World Series. And I think of other years too, it was up there. So.
Mm-hmm. And, 2 years ago when we did our game, it was the same deal. It was the highest scoring game of the Little League World Series. So I guess they just, the defenses fall apart when they know the Kids Cast are.
No, literally. We were all joking around because we were like, it was just so much going on that we didn't even know what to say in the booth, right? Because you prepare all this information and we were fine just like talking with each other. But we didn't know how much baseball to do and how much non-baseball to do. Because obviously we were having more fun just like going back and forth with each other. But the game is such a wreck. You feel like you have to focus on it to some extent. But we were like, oh my God, they're making so many errors that it's like affecting us in the booth. Like we're having errors in the booth. And it was funny because like errors are contagious. So it was like a whole thing.
But let's shift gears now to the major leagues, of course, with your expertise of calling a game. We're less than a month away from the postseason, and some spots seem to be pretty settled, especially like the AL Central with the White Sox and such, but we still have some good battles going on. And I want to first start in the NL West because the San Francisco Giants. Now, me, Tim, and Raheel did an episode right after the All-Star break, and we all predicted that the Giants were going to fall apart and collapse as soon as the second half began, and that didn't happen. And now they're playing against the Dodgers well, and they just beat them in walk-off fashion last night. The question really looms because the Giants are going to be in the playoffs, and they're even trending towards potentially beating the Dodgers and winning the division. Zoe, do you think they can actually sustain in a playoff series?
I mean, I think you have to think about who they're going to be facing in the playoffs, right? So if they go to the playoffs, Dodgers will obviously get the wild card, so they'll meet up somewhere there. But if they're doing well against the Dodgers, then yeah, they're obviously a threat in the playoffs. They're leading in a bunch of statistics. And I mean, yes, it's the Giants, and I think everyone's overlooked them quite a bit this year. We didn't think they were going to be as good as they were. That division was focused mostly on, the Dodgers and the Padres, because that's who everyone thought was going to be good. And the Padres fell off and the Giants became great. I think they could make a run for it just because in the past, that's what the Giants have done in the postseason. They're pretty decent in the postseason just as an organization. But personally, do I see them winning the World Series? No.
Yeah, I got to agree with you because the Los Angeles Dodgers, I feel like, are just too stacked to fall to the Giants in the playoff series. And you've also got to remember the Giants, aside from their older core with Posey and Brandon Belt and Brandon Crawford, the rest of the team is very young and has little to no playoff experience. The Dodgers are coming in with a roster with so much experience from these past few years, and they made acquisitions at the deadline of two players who have won the World Series before in Max Scherzer and Trey Turner. So I think they're kind of battle tested for that. But the third team in the NL West is the San Diego Padres, who we all thought were going to be right there neck and neck with the Dodgers, and that just hasn't happened. And they fired their pitching coach with just like 6 weeks left in the season. Blake Snell gets pulled when he's through 7 innings of a no-hitter the other night. They're battling with the Cincinnati Reds for the last playoff spot. So my question to you, Zoe, do you think that the Padres end up making the playoffs? And if so, can they even get past the wild card game?
Okay. The thing is, I would say I don't think so, but the competition is also the Reds. So you have to think about, what the competition is. The Reds are basically only Joey Votto. Like there are some other guys, but Joey Votto is the main guy on the Reds. And in terms of the Padres, I think it's really hard for a dysfunctional organization, an organization that's literally killing itself right now, to go forward and be successful. So even if they do manage to squeak their way into the playoffs, I think it's going to be hard for them to sustain anything. And I think they definitely lose early because if you're not together as one team, there's no way you're going forward. And that's one of the reasons why the Dodgers are so successful, is because they are together as one team. They're all bonded together and they keep bringing new guys and they keep pedal to the metal and they keep going. And I haven't seen that from the Padres. And honestly, if Tatis misses a game, everything the Padres has crumbles because he holds their whole team together. And you can't have one player holding your whole team together. So I would say they probably will manage to squeak in, but they're not going to go very far.
Yeah, I still think the Reds have a chance to beat them, though, because there is more than just Joey Votto. I mean, Nick Castellanos has been having a really good year. Their starting rotation has been rock solid. Their bullpen's been a mess, but their rotation's been good. I still think there's the possibility that the Reds could beat them out, but whether it's the Dodgers or the Giants who are hosting that wild card game, and I think home field advantage is going to play a big factor in this, especially in a wild card game. We've seen it before. I don't think there's any way the Reds or the Padres get past them. But let's shift gears a little bit to the NL East because, the Mets have won a few games. I know it's against the Nationals and the Marlins, but they're in the midst of a stretch where they play 16 games against Washington and Miami, who are both in rebuild mode. And they're just coming out of that horrible stretch against the Dodgers and the Giants. But they basically told themselves if they played well against Washington, they played well against Miami, they won the games they're supposed to win, they're still going to have a chance just because of how weak the National League East is. And The Phillies can't beat the Arizona Diamondbacks. The Braves are having trouble in Colorado, and now Ozzie Albies is hurt. I'm not losing complete hope yet. I know there's still lots of questions with the Mets regarding their rotation, but Rich Hill pitched well in his last start. Carlos Carrasco pitched well. I mean, everybody's doing their jobs right now, and for once, aside from the catchers, the Mets actually have a healthy roster, knock on wood. You never know for these last couple of weeks. And I know there's no Jacob deGrom right now, and I personally don't see a reason to rush him back right now in September when the chances of them making the playoffs are slim, but that's not impossible. So do you think there's any way the Mets can get past the Braves or the Phillies? And if not, who's the favorite to come out of the NL East?
I have to say, Eddie, that was spoken like a true Mets fan. We're not out of the picture yet. We're almost there.
You gotta believe.
I honestly am in the middle because starting in the beginning of the season, in the middle of the season, I was like, yeah, the Mets are going to do this. They're going to be great. And I realized they were only on top because the other teams sucked. I understood that. And then they went on that whole losing streak and basically just crumbled the whole division for them. So do I think they can get back there? Yes. If they continue to play at the level they've played for this last streak of games. Sure. I mean, even last night, the Mets all season, even we've seen that with the Dodgers and the Giants have been really good at forcing games to go into extra innings. And I think that's a huge part of making the playoffs and going into playoff baseball is that you need to be able to get out of tie game situations and force errors and force more hits and things like that. My concern is in a lot of those games they lost. And I get those were against better teams, but now we're seeing them win. So last night, obviously, the game went to extras and the Mets ended up winning by more than 3 runs. So to me, that looks like a good sign. And that, for me, I think, yes, I think they can win. But that's also said as a Mets fan because I'm like, yeah, they can do it. Like, they're going to get the division. I think they will win the division, but I don't think they'll go very far in the playoffs just because, as I said before, like, they're another team that's not organized enough to do it. There's so much going on behind the scenes. I mean, we just saw what the DUI happened within like the system. It's a little bit of a mess. I don't think anyone fully believes in Luis Rojas, so that's going to be a whole thing. And if someone starts slumping, the whole thing goes down. Plus, you don't have Jacob deGrom fully healthy, and I agree with you. There's no reason to rush him back, and he still can only pitch once every 5-6 starts when he gets back. So it's not like that's going to save you either. So I say, to answer your question, yes, they do win the division and they crawl their way back, but they don't go very far.
Yeah, I don't think any team from the NL East is really going to compete, even against the Milwaukee Brewers. I think the Brewers have too good of a pitching staff, and none of them are beating any of those teams from the National League West. The Braves, I think if they had Acuna, would be in a slightly better spot, and Soroka, but they're without their best pitcher and their best hitter. One of their 2 best hitters up there with Freddie.
The Braves are a lot less scary without Acuna. Like, that was the main thing. That was one of the reasons earlier in the season why I was like, the Mets could actually win the division is because Acuna went down and Ozuna had issues and he was out for a little while and things like that. And so I saw that, but I think still with Acuna out, like, he's the Braves X factor. And without him, the Braves are nowhere near as scary. And then the Phillies are just the Phillies. So I think the Mets could take the division.
The Phillies just they'll go through stretches, and then they won, I think, 3 of 4 against the Padres, and then they got swept by the Diamondbacks. So they capitalize against good teams, and then they just completely fall apart against terrible teams. And that's why the Phillies have been a mediocre franchise for the past decade or so. But for the Mets, of course, they made a lot of headlines over these past few days. It's funny how somehow the general manager being placed on leave because of a DWI kind of got overshadowed by a whole other incident regarding the thumbs down at the fans led by Javier Baez and Francisco Lindor. Clearly, it seems like most of the fans have forgiven them, especially with the amazing comeback against the Marlins the other day. But my one concern, Francisco Lindor is going to be here for a long time. And this is now twice that there's been a pretty significant incident with him. Of course, back in May when him and Jeff McNeil had that weird fight with the raccoon or whatever that was. And then now this. And Javier Baez, I'm not really counting on him as a Mets fan to really be here beyond this season. If any of the 3 that the Cubs traded away were to go back to Chicago, I think he'd be the one in the offseason. I think he also could prove to be the cheapest of the 3 to get because his performance this year with all the strikeouts definitely doesn't merit as huge of a contract as we've seen from other guys like, say, a Trey Turner and such that are, on the market as well. But I don't really think Javier Baez is here to stay, but Francisco Lindor is, whether the Mets like it or not. So is this concerning for the Mets that now twice Francisco Lindor has kind of gotten into an off the field excursion that has kind of upset the fans in some way?
Okay, this is the thing. I think Francisco Lindor, when you think of him, you think of the happy guy, Mr. Smile, a guy that doesn't really get into arguments. So I see it almost as what happened. Was it like a lapse of character? Was it a lapse of judgment that this happened? Because we haven't seen this too many other places. And Javi was brought in to make him happy, right? It was to make Lindor happy. That was like the main reason like Javi came, was that, oh, Lindor wants him here.
Mhm.
I think the Mets are going to have to do something about their upper staff this year. Like, there's no question. There will be changes. There will be firings. There will be turnover. There always is in the Mets organization. And I think once that happens, Lindor is going to be fine. I think they're going to put ground rules down. Right now, Mets players see there's just chaos going on with the Mets. The whole organization is just, what is going on? No one knows. Us as the fans don't know. Them as the players don't know. Even the front office doesn't know. Like, they have zero clue what's going on. And so I think it will get better. I'm not too concerned, maybe for this year, but it's not like the Mets were winning the World Series anyway. The thing I'm interested to see in is, does Javi stay if the Mets bring in a new front office?
I just don't think he's going to stay at all. I feel like there's already a lot of tension here through this first month, and I know he wanted to play with Francisco Lindor, and we saw Francisco Lindor very adamant about a week before the trade deadline about how he wanted Javier Baez in New York, and that's kind of how that happened. But this isn't the NBA. There's a big difference between baseball and basketball. In the NBA, you're going to see superstars recruiting other superstars to build super teams. That just doesn't work in the MLB because it's more of a collective team effort in terms of the roster size. You can't just build a super baseball team with 2 or 3 superstars. You need all 25 of those guys, and they all have a key part in a team. Unlike
You
the
need to be the
NBA,
Dodgers.
Yeah. Unlike in the NBA where it's a 12 player roster, and for some teams you're only going to see 6 or 7 even getting legitimate minutes in a game. So you can't really go by that strategy. And as cool as it is to have El Mago and Javier Baez and Francisco Lindor both in that middle infield, and it definitely provides some defensive help, I don't think the Mets are going to be willing to commit a lot of money to keep Javier Baez when I think there are more important players to lock up long term, i.e. Pete Alonso, who despite all the struggles of the entire lineup, credit to him, he's still played well even through that really bad stretch against the Dodgers and the Giants, and he's really fixed up his defense as well. So it's going to be interesting to see how the Mets handle this. They're going to have a lot of decisions to make this offseason, as is typically the case every season for the New York Mets. But let's quickly touch on the American League, especially the AL East, because you still got 3 teams there that are in reasonable playoff contention. Of course, the Tampa Bay Rays seem to be running away with the division somehow, once again, with a roster of seemingly no-name players. They're still doing it, whether they're using openers and only have like 2 actual starting pitchers. The Rays just win 90 games every year. That's just how it works. The Yankees, though, I'd be concerned right now if I was a Yankees fan, because they went on that 13-game win streak, and then they started to just flat-out collapse after that. And games against Oakland is one thing. Losing against the Angels is another thing. I mean, you gotta be beating the Los Angeles Angels if you're competing for a playoff spot. And you can beat the Baltimore Orioles as much as you want, but when you're playing mediocre teams, you got to be able to capitalize if you want to get good playoff positioning. And I just don't have faith right now in Garrett Cole in a wild card game. I know a lot of Yankee fans would freak out at me saying that, but I think some of them would even agree, because there have been times ever since the whole spider tack thing where Garrett Cole, I mean, he's had some good starts. His last start, he had 15 strikeouts. But there's also been some bad ones, specifically against teams like the Red Sox and the Rays, where he gives up like 6 runs in the first inning. He gets shellacked. He can't get an out. And we've seen that twice already. I remember 1 game in Tampa, 1 game in Boston. And the Red Sox are a team that they could very likely be matching up with in the wild card game. Same with Oakland, and we know how strong the A's offense is. So if you're the Yankees right now, Zoe, what's the mindset heading into this final month of the season? Looks like the division's out of reach, but trying to get into the wild card game, do you think they really have a chance to contend in the American League?
I wish I could say they didn't, but I do think they have that chance. And that's just because they are the Yankees. And when it gets to that postseason push, they're one of the best teams at that. They're one of the best teams with the push. And then in the season, I mean, we've seen that from the Rays recently, but that's usually the Yankees, where we haven't heard from them all year, and they started doing that anyway. They went on that long streak, climbed their way up in the division. And the one issue, as you mentioned, is, yeah, they're having issues against the Rays and the Red Sox, and those are teams that they could very well match up with in the playoffs. And if they can't hold their ground against them with their ace on the mound, how are you going to do anything? And I think pitching has been that issue for, the Yankees all year, is that they've had issues back and forth, injuries brought other people in, and it just hasn't been so consistent. We've seen really good starts, as you said. We've also seen bad starts, and Spider Tack ruined them, as you said, another thing. And we talk about, us being Mets fans, so it's like, oh, the Mets pitching has been better than the Yankees pitching. But usually there's an argument. This year it was like, before DeGrom went down, it was like the Mets pitching was significantly better than the Yankees pitching. And the Yankees have crazy big hitters. But if you can't hold a team on defense, it doesn't matter what you do on offense, because the other teams are just going to beat up on you. So, yeah, I think they are somehow going to manage to sneak their way into that wild card spot, but they're going to have to get their pitching together. And if you're the Yankees right now, you can't be letting go at all. You can't be holding back or anything. If every game now is a must win, it just is. You have no other thing. It's like for the Mets. It's like you can't drop easy games. You have to win everything you can, and you have to beat up on other teams to prepare for the postseason. And usually something we don't see from the Yankees, like them taking a step back and taking their foot off the gas. You don't see. They keep their foot on the gas the whole way until their opponent is far down and like buried. Like that's the Yankees thing. And I think they, as much as I would hate to see them do it, I think they have to keep that mindset if they want any chance at the playoffs.
Yeah, you can't doubt this team one bit when you look at the lineup that they roll out there. I mean, Joey Gallo, Anthony Rizzo, Luke Voigt has found himself, and he won Player of the Week a couple of weeks ago. Giancarlo Stanton is finally having a consistent, healthy season and is doing exactly what the Yankees asked of him when they traded for him in that massive deal back in 2018. So they're in a good spot right now. So the question is, can this continue? I am a little concerned about some of these losses that they've had, like I said, against the Angels, and they do still have to play the Rays. I think they're still contenders, but every year it seems like the Yankees have a solid roster, they get into the playoffs, and then either Tampa Bay or Houston prove to be their kryptonite. And those are the two best teams in the American League, I still think, again. The White Sox are really good. This is going to be the first time they're really competing in an actual playoffs. I'm not really counting last year when all the teams made the playoffs, basically. But you're going to have a big test in facing the Houston Astros if you're the Yankees, or the Tampa Bay Rays out of that wild card game if you win. Probably a series against Tampa. And even if you escape that, Aroldis Chapman is going to have to figure out how to pitch to the Houston Astros again. He couldn't in 2017. He couldn't in 2019. So there's got to be some questions there heading forwards. But we'll get more into baseball over these next few weeks. We'll also get more into the NFL next week, but I want to touch on a couple of news stories from the NFL, and probably the biggest one of the week came with the Patriots naming Mac Jones as their starting quarterback. And not just doing that, but straight up releasing Cam Newton from the roster. Now, I do not agree with this move whatsoever, because Patriots don't really have a backup beyond Mac Jones. They don't really have a backup plan. And Mac Jones has been impressive so far in the preseason. But the preseason, we've seen most teams not even using any of their starting players. We know they usually just play the first couple series. Teams like the Chargers, the Raiders, they just sat everybody for the entire preseason. They said, no, they're not playing any snaps. They don't want to risk any injuries, which I think is fair. But that's the competition that Mac Jones was playing against throughout the preseason. And I have a little bit of concern. He does have some weapons, of course, bringing in Jonnu Smith, Nelson Aguilar. There's some experienced veteran targets that he's going to be able to work with. But the question is, can he actually perform? And what do the Patriots do if he's not performing well? Cam Newton keeping him there. I know Cam probably wouldn't have wanted to be a backup, but you still would have had him on the roster. And they're going to have to sign some sort of backup quarterback that has some NFL experience, because if Mac Jones gets hurt or if he's inefficient, Bill Belichick's not going to want to stick with him. He still has a little bit of consideration with the Patriots' legacy and wanting this team to perform. And he still is trying to prove himself without Tom Brady. Last year, you can kind of give a little bit of an excuse. Cam Newton had no weapons. It was just a weird year in the NFL. But Bill Belichick wants to prove that he can be a winning coach without having Tom Brady as his quarterback. And it starts now with Mac Jones. But if Mac Jones isn't performing well, you need to have someone who can step in there. So I really don't agree with the decision to release Cam Newton.
Okay. I agree. I was surprised when Cam was released. But the thing is that if you're Mac Jones and you know that if you mess up, there's a backup plan, I think you play a little safer. And I think you do things a different way. Whereas if you know you are the starter, you need to play well because you are our only chance of success. And you're basically representing the entire Patriots organization. I think that puts a good pressure on him. And I think that makes him perform. Yes, it is concerning that they have a rookie as the only quarterback on their roster. That Bill Belichick, what are you doing? That seems a little stupid. But the truth is, Cam Newton wasn't going to be the QB to lead them to where Bill Belichick wanted them to. And I think because of that, he was like, why am I keeping a mediocre QB on my team? For Bill Belichick, it's Super Bowl or bust. It's not, I want to be mediocre and work my way up. He doesn't have time for that. He's an old dude. He's been with the Patriots forever. And he just simply doesn't have the patience for it. He's on a win now mandate. He doesn't want to slowly work his way up. So Mac Jones is stepping into a system where he's got to win now. And Cam Newton wasn't getting it done. Even in the weird season he had with everything that happened, he obviously wasn't getting it done. So I understand getting rid of him. As for not having a backup, they'll pick up some random dude and it'll be okay. Personally, I don't know how much I believe in Mac Jones, but seeing how Cam performed last year, I think Mac Jones will be better. I can't say how much better, but I do sort of understand the releasing Cam just to like tell Mac, hey, we believe in you. You are our guy going forward and we need you here. Because I think if you keep the other guy on your roster, it shows that you have doubt and that can hurt a player as well. Plus, Bill Belichick's just all in. They don't care. They're like, okay, you're our dude. That's what they did with Brady. And I think they're expecting Mac Jones to be another Brady. And I don't know if that happens, but that definitely doesn't happen if you have an experienced veteran behind you.
So my next question is this, because Cam Newton, of course, has not been the same. He's a former MVP, guided the Panthers to facing off with Peyton Manning in the Super Bowl back in 2015. That's a long time ago now. And ever since then, he's been slowly on the decline. His last year with the Panthers was mired by injuries. And of course, last year had more picks than touchdowns with the New England Patriots. So the question is, do you think that Cam's going to land on his feet somewhere? And if so, do you think he's going to get another chance as a starting quarterback in the NFL?
Cam will land on his butt on a cold metal bench as a backup. He's not going to walk in anywhere and just be a starter. It's not the way it goes. It's not the way any team's going to have it function, especially, how can you start a guy who, as you mentioned, threw more picks than touchdowns last year? How can you start a guy who has no idea what he's doing with the ball and just throws into covers that don't work? Even if you do have no receivers, he's known for his legs. He wasn't great at running the ball. If you're a running quarterback, you have to have an arm. It's the only way you make it in the NFL. And his arm hasn't showed up. It hasn't proved that he can do it, and especially his head. And so, yeah, maybe you do want him as a backup. I think if he manages to land somewhere, which he probably will, just because he's Cam Newton, and if a team has the chance, hey, I'll sign you for 1 year for basically no money, come sit on my bench, talk to my players, maybe teach them how to run, like, sure, take Cam Newton. But if I was a coach, I also don't know if I would want that player. The backup QB sometimes teaches the QB, like I see what happens from the sidelines. I see what's behind the scenes. Do you want a guy who isn't understanding reads to be teaching your starter how? Like, I understand not having him on the Patriots, because why would you teach Mac Jones teach him how to throw an interception? Like, okay, yeah, cool. But Cam Newton will land somewhere, probably. I literally don't even know where he'll land. He'll land at some random team. We won't see him all season, maybe once when a player goes down, but he's not going to be a starting quarterback in the NFL. I don't even know if he'll get his chance to be.
Maybe he can even be Jared Goff back up in Detroit. You never know. Or the Eagles. The Eagles just keep signing more and more quarterbacks, and they bring in Gardner Minshew. They've got Flacco. That maybe they could add Cam Newton to the carousel as well. You never know. But next week, of course, Thursday night, we've got the Cowboys and the Buccaneers facing off. This is the last show before that opening night game. We'll have another one next weekend to really preview the entire NFL season. But before that opening night game, I kind of want to get your pick, Zoe, here. Cowboys and Bucks, of course, Dak Prescott is back for the Cowboys. As for the Buccaneers, as much as you doubted them in the Super Bowl last year and their entire offense, they bring back all 22 starters on offense and defense, and that team's still going to be really good. And Tom Brady just keeps getting older and older, but seems to be getting more and more efficient with his passes. And we saw it in the Super Bowl, and we saw how strong that defense was. So Cowboys, Buccaneers, Zoe, who's your pick to win on opening night?
I can't believe I'm saying this, but I guess I can. Gotta go Buccaneers. I did doubt them like last year, completely doubted them last year, because for me, I was like, how do you bring Brady in and throw a team randomly together who literally almost every player was signed to a 1-year contract? How do you throw that team together and expect them to win a Super Bowl? But they did, they went through, and they had great chemistry. And now that I've seen that chemistry, I am more confident in the Buccaneers. I don't know if I'd pick them to win the Super Bowl again, but I think they're definitely a contender and up there. As for the Cowboys, Dak hasn't played in quite a while. He's been hurt, and Dak will have really good games, but he'll also have games where he looks like he's a rookie and doesn't know what he's doing. And for me, the main concern for the Cowboys is Zeke. Because when Zeke's running well, the Cowboys can be amazing. But when he's not, they're just, it's just Dak. And without Zeke, Dak's game significantly decreases because, the running attack takes pressure off the passing attack. So that's what I'll be looking for. I think the Buccaneers take this game basically no problem, but I'm interested to see how this outlines the Cowboys' gameplay for the rest of the season, just because of what happens. And also, I'm just very excited to see Parsons in action. I just can't wait for that. So, yeah.
I think the Buccaneers are going to win, but I think it's going to be a little closer than some people might think. I think Tampa's going to pull ahead early because Dak Prescott, let's remember, has not gotten any snaps in the preseason. He has not played since he injured his leg against the Giants back in week 4, I believe, last season. So it's been a long time. And you mentioned Ezekiel Elliott. Well, it's becoming more and more common that he's inefficient running the football. It seems like as the years have gone on, he's just not as dominant, and he doesn't have the same speed. He doesn't have the same, ability to evade defenders. I'm not going to go full on and compare him to Eddie Lacy, but it's a decline from Ezekiel Elliott for sure compared to what we saw coming out of Ohio State in his first couple years when he led the NFL in rushing, I believe back in 2017. But it's been a tough stretch for Ezekiel Elliott. I think the Cowboys, though, will get in sync. I don't think it's going to be too difficult of an adjustment for Dak Prescott to get back into it. And the Buccaneers defense is not going to do the same thing to Dak Prescott that they did to Patrick Mahomes in the Super Bowl, because the Cowboys do have a strong offensive line. They've got some Pro Bowlers there. They've got a lot of experienced veterans. It's not like the Chiefs, who had like 3 backups playing in the Super Bowl on their offensive line. So I think the Buccaneers do win it. I think their offense is just too talented, and they're going to get off to a good start early because Tom Brady has actually played a decent amount of snaps in the preseason. If anybody in the entire league probably deserved those 3 weeks to just get to sit on the bench, it's Brady, yet he's still got some opportunities to play. So he's all ready and warmed up and ready to go. I think the Cowboys keep it close. I don't think it's going to be more than about a 10, maybe 14-point difference in the final score, but Tampa Bay definitely takes the opener. But we'll have a whole lot more to preview the NFL season next week on Sports Speak. Tim Moore's going to be coming on next to talk some college football and the NASCAR playoffs. But Zoe Alter, thanks so much for joining us yet again here on Sports Speak.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
Well, we're keeping it going right here on Sports Speak, episode 68. I'm Eddie Kalegi.
And I'm Tim Moore.
We got Tim here now. A lot to break down. College football season, of course, just got started. Some upsets, some action all across the country. And then, of course, the NASCAR playoffs kick off at Darlington. We'll get to that in just a few minutes. But let's start on the college scene. I'm going to first just give a couple of my opinions here because there were some surprises, honestly, that I saw. It really starts, first of all, with Georgia knocking off Clemson. And there's a lot of questions about 2 coaches today, and those are Ed Orgeron in LSU and Dabo Swinney in Clemson, and whether or not these 2 coaches really have that great of a legacy when they don't have a generational quarterback with them. This is the 2nd straight year with LSU that they suffer a pretty bad loss to start the season, since they had the miraculous year with Joe Burrow at quarterback, Clyde Edwards-Helaire as a running back, Justin Jefferson as wide receiver, all 3 of them established players now in the NFL. had a bad year last year when they were ranked top 5 in the preseason poll, and now lose to a UCLA team coached by Chip Kelly, who has had their fair share of bad losses as well, and are not necessarily a world beater by any standards over these past couple of years. And then you go to Clemson, and I know it's a loss to Georgia, and Georgia's one of the top teams in the country and a championship contender just like Clemson, and it was only a one-score game. But to see the Clemson Tigers only score 3 points, it's a little scary. And let's not forget how last season ended when they got demolished and upset and upended by Justin Fields and the Ohio State Buckeyes, who so many people said, because of the Big Ten schedule, because they hadn't played that many tough games, they'd have no chance against Clemson, and they rolled right past them. So this is 2 bad losses in a row for Clemson. And you really have to wonder if this team can succeed without Trevor Lawrence, without Travis Etienne. I mean, there's so many questions here. The ACC schedule, I think they'll get back together, and maybe they won't lose another game this season. They don't have to play Miami. I don't think they play UNC either, who also lost this first week, but you know what? It's still concerning seeing Clemson lose like that and seeing their offense just be that silent. So Clemson and LSU, my big takeaway from this weekend is that some of these coaches that we think might be generational coaches are only as good as the generational quarterback that they have. Tim, how about you? Some takeaways from week 1 of the college football season.
Yeah, I think the real big thing for Clemson that we have to remember, this team's got really good quarterbacks all the way back to when Deshaun Watson was playing quarterback there. And it really transitioned year after year after year. And I think for the first time for Clemson in a long time, we're starting to see the fact that they don't really have that playmaker under center. But the other thing, too, that I have to take really big notice to in terms of Clemson, and that's the fact that also for the first time in a very long time, this team doesn't really have big offensive linemen. Now, I know size doesn't necessarily play the full picture in the line, but when you look at Clemson year after year, even dating back to the early 2000s, there's always tall, 300-pound plus, pass blockers that they have that usually, might I add, really fare well in the NFL. And the fact of the matter is, it's a really undersized offensive line. Might I also add, very inexperienced offensive line. And it's almost like right now they're trying to plug and fill the holes to be a competitor. Whereas other teams, for example, Alabama, you have, of course, your mix of youth as well as experience. And sure, I'll even jump Ohio State. Granted, you're going to go another direction now with quarterback. But this team still has some experienced players within its defense as well as within its offensive line they carry forward, for years to come. And the fact of the matter is this, every single team, and I'll even say it like this, because we truly, let's be honest, didn't see the full effect of pandemic football last season, especially when some teams played, in the spring. To me, ultimately, I really think this year is the true tale of pandemic football, just how we saw in NCAA basketball with some surprises. I'm not saying Clemson's going to be terrible. They're going to go, below 500. But I really think this is starting to emphasize the point again. Of course, Alabama's going to prove you wrong because they always get the best players in the nation, quote unquote, no matter what they do. Everyone wants to play for Bama or a big Ohio State team and so on. But the fact of the matter is, recruiting isn't easy. You have to pick the right guys. And when you can't get those big guys to come to your school, you have to remember you may not be as competitive as what you're known to be. And the pandemic took that a lot away for schools having access to hands-on recruiting to football players around the country. Now, I will say recruiting overall, not just in D1, but other sports, is at an all-time high as a result of that. But you have to wonder how heavily scouted or a lot of these decisions that teams have made. And I'm not saying that, maybe Clemson made a lot of wrong decisions, but to me, they face a factor that's really, really hard. And for Dabo Swinney, this is probably now one of your toughest seasons. Because I honestly don't remember the last time, too, Clemson walked into a season starting 0-1. So you already have to play with a chip on your shoulder. And the realism is now, if you lose another game, the season goes downhill. Because if you lose one more, granted the conference you play in, yes, you've been a powerhouse for years, but if you lose 2 games, you're not going to make the national championship. You're not going to make the playoffs. It's going to be really tough to see that, especially, yes, of course, Georgia ends up beating them, and you'll get a little bit leeway because that's a team that's, projected if they don't make the Final Four, they're right there. So to me, they'll get some leeway with that. But we'll see what they do, against a bunch of unranked teams within ACC. And if that offense can come to life, great. But if you don't have anyone making any big playmaking opportunities and you're not getting the jolt, and what I mean by it is when you see teams that are just not good and they're not scoring 30, 40 points offensively, that's when I'm going to start to strike some major concern. Because to me, I feel like Georgia was dominant defensively with that defensive line, but I'm not going to deny and say Clemson's offensive line is just not good. I truthfully believe it's not good.
It's just crazy to see this, and there's a disparity too, because you mentioned that this is kind of the pandemic after effects, just like we saw in college basketball. And there were, of course, Duke, Kansas, North Carolina, Kentucky, all the down years. I don't think we're going to see it that extreme in college football, but I still think there's the possibility that we could see some upsets with some programs on the rise and some others that fall a little bit. It's completely different dynamic than what we saw last year. We saw how, it's so nice to see college football back, and last year just really didn't feel like a normal year. You had Pac-12 only playing 6 games, other conferences playing 10, some playing in front of no fans. Now you've got the packed student sections again, which is great to see. It just feels more normal. But I have trouble putting Clemson sometimes up there with the other powerhouse teams, because you've got to realize, I know Clemson has been consistent in making the championship every year these past 5 years or so, but prior to Deshaun Watson, this team was, borderline top 25, maybe they'd crack the top 10. They were not a powerhouse team. From the ACC, both Miami and Florida State have historically had better football programs than Clemson. You can't really put Clemson, I feel like, in the long term in the same conversation as Alabama or Ohio State and Oklahoma, who every year come out, they always replenish. Alabama comes back, they play a top 15 team with a new quarterback, new receiving core, new defensive leaders, and they still win by 30 points. Ohio State and Oklahoma both got battle tested, but guess what? New rosters, lots of changeover, they still won. That's one more win than Clemson has right now. I know Clemson played Georgia, but their offense really stalled. But one other thing with college football, of course, I've got to talk about my Rutgers Scarlet Knights a little bit. Nice to see them win 61-14 over Temple. And I know it's just Temple, and I don't want to get too far ahead of myself because I know they're not expected to do particularly well against certain Big Ten teams, namely Ohio State and Penn State. But getting a win like that is something we haven't seen from Rutgers since Greg Schiano coached the team in his first term. In the eras of Kyle Flood and Chris Ash, when Rutgers would play FCS opponents or lower-level FBS opponents, they lost a couple. They lost to Eastern Michigan a couple years ago, but they'd play down to their opponents and they'd maybe win by 10 points, 7 points, and it would be in doubt. By midway through the third quarter, this game was not in doubt whatsoever. Rutgers led by double digits the entire game. You never really see this from the Scarlet Knights team. And even though their quarterback Noah Vedral struggled, it was nice to see them playing well as a group, picking them up. The defense was solid. The running game with Kyle Monangai was really strong. Isaiah Pacheco had a touchdown. It's nice to see Rutgers doing this. Looking at their schedule, they need to capitalize in these first 3 games. Their biggest test of the first 3 weeks is next Saturday at the Carrier Dome. They go and play Syracuse, so they haven't played since they used to both be in the Big East, last in 2012. So it's been a while, a rivalry renewed between the Scarlet Knight and the Orange, but they've got to capitalize in that game. They got to start 3-0, because then you're halfway home to a bowl. And Rutgers had some nice wins in Big Ten games last year with a weaker roster. They've got Michigan State to play. Northwestern is down from what they were. Illinois, their quarterback, by the way, is Rutgers' old quarterback, Art Sitkowski. Maryland had a big win against West Virginia, but it's possible for Rutgers to beat them. There are 4 winnable games there. The other 5 I wouldn't really put in that caliber, but if they could take 3 of those 4 games and they capitalize on the first 3 here in out-of-conference play, they could potentially reach a bowl. So, Tim, one last thing on college football. Of course, Rutgers was probably my big surprise with how much they dominated Temple. What is your biggest surprise from week 1 of the season?
To me, it's going to have to be Penn State over Wisconsin, in my opinion. I mean, let's be honest. We knew Penn State's defense was solid, but offensively, they'd been a question mark. And granted, we saw majority defense that game, but we really saw not consistent play from Penn State offensively, but we saw big plays when it mattered. And, going to Wisconsin and, having really, how do I put it like this? The first big game with fans back in a stadium, and to almost deflate legitimately a stadium in one game, to me, for Penn State, just like the emotional feel, has to feel really confident, because this is a team that, when you look at it on paper, again, that offense not as good as what it was back in the Saquon Barkley era. Of course, they had Trace McSorley and so on, a legend in Penn State, needless to say. But overall now, that offense has been, shambles. And we looked at the pandemic year. Penn State, let's be honest, was embarrassing last year. So for this college to turn around and knock off a ranked team, granted, again, Wisconsin, they basically play them every year, but at the end of the day, that's a big feat right now, early on in the season. For example, how I point out, Georgia Clemson, for the first time in a while, Clemson loses their first game. One loss now, you're playing with a chip on your shoulder. One loss can, really change the complexion of the year. Penn State winning this game can really help rally them around them for when they got to face more of those big ranked schools within the Big Ten. And to me right there, again, getting big stops, getting a big interception, might I add, and just making big passing plays when it matters, to me is just the ultimate part and recipe for success right now for Penn State. And I like good defensive matchups sometimes. Yeah, in the NFL, we're gifted with guys like Patrick Mahomes, Tom Brady. We're, expecting the Super Bowl to have a high-scoring game. Granted, it really didn't turn out that way for Patrick Mahomes because he didn't have a lineman. But the point is, we're gifted in the sport of football a lot of times now today with high-scoring games. But when you see a good defensive affair that we saw between Penn State and Wisconsin, it really does make you appreciate the game of football a little bit more, because just how competitive it can get in a back-and-forth matchup. And again, Penn State, absolutely huge, by far the big surprise. And I do want to say on your point about Rutgers, I truthfully do believe, I know last year when we talked about this, they were like, oh, well, maybe they'll get 500. That'd be a wish. I truthfully do believe this program's going to have a bowl game this year. I really do.
I think it's definitely possible, but you mentioned the defensive battles, the 2 big games of the week, Georgia Clemson, Wisconsin Penn State. The highest scoring team of those 4 was Penn State, I believe, with 17 points. So it's different to see that, because thinking about all these high-scoring games, even in the national championship when Alabama and Clemson would play each other a few years ago, when it would be like Jalen Hurts against Deshaun Watson and such, you'd have like 45, 38 games. Joe Burrow would be running up the stat sheet a couple years ago. It does make you appreciate the defenses a little more. And some fans might say it's boring. They want to see the high-octane offense. But trust me, when these teams play lower-caliber conference opponents, you'll get to see all the offense you want and then some. But let's shift gears to the racing world, because the NASCAR season has reached the postseason. Daytona was crazy to say the least. A lot of big wrecks towards the end, but a good race nonetheless from beginning to end. I think a lot of fans could be happy about how the package panned out with a pretty solid Daytona race, and the fact that they were able to keep the cars clean until the 3rd stage when all heck broke loose, which was probably expected. But the 16-driver field is set. And it all starts off at Darlington, which hosted a race earlier this season. They already had the throwback weekend, yet NASCAR's sort of incorporating it as a throwback weekend, and they're still having Kyle Petty and Dale Jarrett in the broadcast booth for a stage, which personally I don't see as that big of a throwback, but you know what? It's something. But you're heading into this race, you're starting off the playoffs, and there's some guys coming in with a lot of momentum and some that are really lacking it. I think Ryan Blaney, of course, is in the best position. He's won back-to-back races. I wouldn't count out Joey Logano either. I think he's starting to figure things out. Martin Truex Jr. has always been really good at Darlington Raceway, and I think he's going to have a chance to contend for the victory. Denny Hamlin as well has had a bit of an interesting week on Twitter, to say the least, but had some speed in the Xfinity race until he had some unfortunate mistakes with his pit crew towards the end of that race, and Noah Gragson went to victory lane. And then it's just interesting to see because there are two drivers, in at least two that you could say in the playoffs, that don't really deserve to be in the playoffs, Eric Almarola and Michael Mcdowell. I want to see how either of them could potentially prove the doubters wrong. Eric Almarola and it's not like Almarola, this is some fluke year that he even made the playoffs. Let's not forget, he almost made the Final Four a few years ago. He was fifth in points for a while in the round of 8 the year he won at Talladega. I think that was 2018. He's had consistent years where he's run well with that Stewart-Haas Racing team that still has tons of speed. They just have had no luck whatsoever this year, whether it's Custer or Almarola or Harvick. Just nothing has gone their way this entire season. But he's got speed. He's good at the short tracks. Darlington, he wrecked at, but was running towards the front back in May. So I'm curious to see what he can do. And as for Michael Mcdowell, suddenly now with all the rumors with 2311 Racing and Front Row Motorsports possibly combining and 2311 taking on those charters, Michael McDowell's future is suddenly in doubt. Where is he going to go? Crazy to think that the person who won the Daytona 500 doesn't even know if he has a cup ride next year. But he's trying to prove himself. And of course, he's come back to the pack. He had that crazy start to the year where we had 3 top 10s. Even at Homestead, he had finished in the top 10. And people thought that maybe he was going to have, the upset of the century all season. Didn't stay that way. But he is a good short track racer. He was towards the top half of the field at Darlington back in May. I'm curious to see what he can do. I'm not saying that either of these guys are necessarily going to make it to the round of 12, but if they can at least stay competitive and have a remote shot going into the third race of the round of moving on without a win, just saying that they're still in points contention, reasonable points contention, I still think that's a victory for both the 10 and the 34 team. But we'll make our championship picks momentarily. But Tim, let's start with this. What are your expectations heading into this Darlington race today?
Well, I think it's one of the most unique tracks, first off, Darlington, and I think drivers really do define it well how they have all weekend. You race the track. It's a driver's track. It is not a track that just comes to you, and it's that simple, especially with the package NASCAR is running. You can run all the high downforce in the world if you really wanted to, but the lady in black, it attacks, and you have to be ready for it. And the fact of the matter is, 500 miles, it is not easy to do at all, especially with the fact that it'll transition. I believe when they start, it'll be just around sundown, if I'm not mistaken. And then once the lights come on, it's, a whole different ballgame. But I'll tell you this, for a lot of guys right now, Eddie, this is arguably the biggest race for a lot of guys defining guys' playoffs. For example, Brad Keselowski, who has been nothing but mediocre since he won earlier this season and has really, really struggled. Now, granted, he finished top 10 in points, but he had such a good start that realistically, he probably really had the 15th or 16th best season of all drivers this season. This is statistically Brad's best track. I would love to see Brad find some success, and let's see maybe if he can win. Because again, the fact of the matter is, I feel that this is Brad's best opportunity. You also mentioned Tyler Reddick a few moments ago. I think this is a track as well that's really a big opportunity for Tyler Reddick. Because Darlington, again, being a driver's track, he's really good at tire conservation and so on. Not that Darlington completely burns out tires, but Reddick's really good at driving loose race cars and making aggressive moves. I also look at a track that's in this round, Richmond, that has also become very, very recently a driver's track. Let's not forget in the spring how many drivers finished on the lead lap there in that race. It's very, very few. So I see two races that really create opportunities, but particularly here in Darlington, I think that a lot of guys that, in my opinion, are on the cusp have a really, really great opportunity today to say, hey, even if I have a mediocre race somewhere within this point, I can find ways to be competitive. And the thing is about this playoffs that for the first time since this new system has ever happened is the fact that at some point this season, every single driver has earned rather a stage win or a race win. And to that point, bonus points, everyone has them. So realistically, if you're a guy that had average bonus points, won 2 races, but didn't really have many stage wins to throw at it, I'll even give an example. Alex Bowman won 3 races. Great, he has 15 points. But it's almost illegitimate when he only has a 10-point gap back to the cutoff spot. He didn't get top 10 in points. It's going to be a little bit of an issue. Now, I'm not saying Bowman's a problem, but rather what I'm saying is these gaps are a lot tighter than what it seems. If it was, for example, a Kyle Larson size gap, which of course not every driver can have, but if it was a Kyle Larson size gap back to, a guy who didn't have any bonus points, then okay. But realistically, these stages are going to get hectic compared to when we were at Darlington earlier this year. Every point now matters. Your season can legitimately be changed all based upon one stage. So with that being said, I expect the race in the beginning, at least, to be calm, give and take, but almost like Daytona where you're just preparing for disaster come the end of stages. I genuinely think you're going to see maybe a caution today towards the end of stage 1. Guys will tone it down a little bit and really go, for it all between these stages. And I think the one thing we have to remember is every single year in the round of 16, we always assume, oh, well, it's just going to be the best of the 16. But there is always a driver that makes the playoffs that has a problem in this round of 16, and typically in the first race. To me, I'm not going to go and predict exactly who that person's going to be because I think Brad Keselowski, driver-wise, is a lot better than the round of 16. But he's one of the guys that I view on the cusp. Eric Almarola, I don't know how to feel. He could be good at Richmond, but I don't know how to feel about him in Darlington. He's already putting himself a hole, in my opinion. Michael Mcdowell, if he survives, maybe he gets a Regan Smith win of a lifetime. Then great for McDowell. But, really, I'm looking at, let's say, 3 drivers that is including Tyler Reddick, if he doesn't find success here at Darlington, that, all right, you're pretty much already on the fringe. But who's that driver that's going to be out? And I think that's the real big thing. Each round this year is going to have a surprise driver that gets eliminated. And the question is, what conclusion, what team do you ultimately draw? Because someone's going to have a problem today. I don't know who it's going to be, but there is going to be a playoff guy that's going to have a problem. And it's probably going to be a driver no one expects and probably isn't named Kyle Larson. That's my ultimate guess.
Yeah. Now, in my book, we're going to make our final 4 picks in just a second, but I think I'm going to just go through a little bit. So I think Michael McDowell is not going to make the round of 12. I think it's pretty safe to assume that I don't think he's getting a victory lane. He might put together some solid races, but that 34 car is not going anywhere. I like Tyler Reddick today. I also like him at the short tracks, but I just don't see that car having the consistency and also the lack of points. You talked about the importance of having those points. Tyler Reddick does not have a race win, got that stage win, but he got those stage wins back at the Indy Road Course, but he doesn't have that much backing him. So I think Reddick's going to be gone, but I think he's going to be a force to be reckoned with down the line. And I think in the next couple of years, RCR is going to be pretty consistent at getting both Reddick and Austin Dillon into the playoffs. But I don't think this year is his year. My little dark horse is that Eric Almarola is going to make the round of 12. I just have this feeling that the luck is finally going to turn the 10's way and the bacon machine is going to get going here in this first round. I do think Kevin Harvick is kind of in a bit of a dangerous spot, just having that lack of points. He's consistent, he's good at these tracks, but he's someone I could see potentially running into trouble because, like I said, nothing has gone right for him all season. Christopher Bell, I don't know what to expect. Of course, it's been a long time since he got that win. I think people kind of forgot about when he won that race at the Daytona Road Course. He hasn't done much since. He's been consistent this season, but of course, he still doesn't have the same speed as the other three Gibbs cars. I think there's a possibility with him. I'd watch out with Alex Bowman. I think he's the weak link right now of Hendrick Motorsports. William Byron has proven himself this season. He's proven me wrong because I said on this show that I thought William Byron was overrated and wasn't really going to be able to stick with Chase Elliott and others. He's proven me wrong this year. Alex Bowman has not really lived up to the same potential. He does have those race wins. Some of those a bit of a surprise. He's kind of fulfilled Kevin Harvick's old nickname of the closer, remembering that race at Richmond where he came out of nowhere and ended up coming out with the victory. I just don't really see Bowman going forwards that very far. Maybe he'll make the round of 12. Definitely not going past that. I like Keselowski. I think there's the possibility that Brad could put something together and get on a run, especially since this is his last time with Penske. And while he is becoming a minority owner with Roush and he's going to have an opportunity with that team, Roush has not had much success when it comes to the playoffs in the past few years. I mean, it's been years since they've really had a competitive car that had any sort of championship aspirations. I think you really have to go back to Carl Edwards for the last time they really had a championship contender. And Ryan Newman and Chris Buescher are solid drivers, but Roush, I even feel like in some ways just doesn't have the equipment right now to contend with Penske or even Haas if they're having a good day in the Ford camp. So Keselowski's got to try to take advantage of this opportunity right now, these final 10 races at Penske. I think that's going to motivate him. And I think he's going to have a chance to win this race, but I think he's absolutely moving on to the round of 12. But in terms of my final four, I'm going to say Kyle Larson just because of the buffer. Even if things go wrong in a couple of these rounds, I don't see how you could logically leave him out of the final four. I also don't see how you can leave Kyle Busch out. I know Kyle Busch has had some tough breaks this season, but I'd argue that the 18 has been the second most consistent car out there all year behind the 5. He's been up front constantly. All those races during that stretch when Hendrick Motorsports would have all 4 of their cars in the top 5, many times that 5th spot in the top 5 was Kyle Busch. We saw that at Dover. We saw that in other races as well. Kyle Busch was up there with Kyle Larson and Chase Elliott on multiple occasions. Chase Elliott fans, don't freak out at me. I do not have Chase Elliott going to the final 4. I see some bad luck coming his way in the round of 8. He won his championship. I don't think it's going to happen again this year. Penske, I think, is going to get 2 drivers in the final 4. Ryan Blaney, I think this is finally the breakout year for that 12 team. I know these last 2 weeks, maybe just, the recency bias a little bit for me, seeing how successful he's been. And I know one of those wins is Daytona, but still Ryan Blaney is having his best season in his 4 years with Penske. And I'm going to say a little bit of a dark horse, but I think Brad Keselowski is going to put together a playoff run. How many times, Tim, have we seen Brad Keselowski have a bit of a under the radar season and then around this time of year, entering the playoffs or in the first couple races of the postseason, he'll run off a stretch and win 3 out of 4 races. We've seen this multiple times before from that 2 team. I think that's going to happen, but I think he's going to be able to stretch it out across the rounds. I think he's going to obviously be a contender at Talladega to potentially win that race. The only race that scares me with him is the Charlotte Roval, because I don't really know what's happened, but Brad Keselowski is not the same road course racer he once was when he used to contend for wins constantly at Watkins Glen. But I say it's going to come down to Blaney, Keselowski, Kyle Busch, and Kyle Larson. But my 2021 champion, I got to say, is Kyle Larson. He's been the best driver all season long. Hard to pick against him. I say Larson wins the chip at Phoenix. So, Tim, what are your final 4 and who is your championship pick for this season?
Of course, again, I emphasize this many shows back, but NASCAR likes to ultimately label this as the best season ever when they came into the Daytona 500 weekend. But I genuinely believe this is the most unexpected season ever. Now, I do want to challenge you on one point. You obviously mentioned Alex Bowman being the weak link, and I do agree he hasn't had the best season of Hendrick. But if you've looked dating back to July 4th, William Byron has actually been the worst driver on Hendrick, believe it or not.
Yeah, I know, but I think he's had some bad luck as well.
Yes, he's had a fair share of bad luck, but an average finish of 25th. 25th. That doesn't all come to play. Yes, Alex Bowman wrecked him at Road America because he lost his brakes partially. You look at instances like Daytona where he was just in the wrong place, wrong time. But there's a lot of situations where you see him having a good day and things just fall apart at the end. And again, I'm not saying this can be the round of 16 where he falls apart, but again, expect the unexpected. Alex Bowman, give him some credit, had the second best playoffs after, might I add, a mediocre season last year and turned it around when it mattered. He did that the season before. Someone that's not a road course racer has what, 2-3 top fives at the Roval? And that seems to be the only road course he's good at. There's a lot of tracks. Richmond, Bowman won at earlier this year. He had the best long run car. And I know people are saying, oh, for him, just like Pocono, that's a Mickey Mouse win. But if you looked at the speed charts and everything, this man got his team got penalized, got sent to the rear of the field, drove through the field from 11th to 3rd place from the rear, got an opportunity on a restart, and ultimately capitalized on it. I view Bowman as a massive, massive threat, not for the Final Four, but a massive threat over William Byron, who has not had a lot of playoff success. Not saying that Byron won't, but I'm truthfully convinced Byron will not make it past the round of 12. I genuinely do think that. I think Byron had a really good start. A lot of the Hendrick drivers had a really good start, but it's almost like that 2014 peak too early, in my opinion. So the round of 16, I have it like this. I have Tyler Reddick out, unfortunately, although, again, he can be a surprise. 2 good tracks for him. Eric Almarola out, Michael McDowell out, pretty obvious. But my surprise out in the round of 16, I have honestly is Brad Keselowski. Now, Eddie, I know you think that he'll go to the Final Four. And I can agree, Keselowski in the past has gone through stretches. But Brad Keselowski also in the past, when he's gone through those stretches, has won 2 to 3 races within the season. Brad's only won once. And if I'm going to be honest, the race he won, he really shouldn't have won. So for Brad right now to have as bad as the season, especially in the road courses, we mentioned Oval, where it looks like that 2 car just can never find any rear grip. I do want to believe that he can turn it up again. Darlington's a really good track for him. But we've never seen Brad ever struggle this bad. And to me, it's just really tough to see. For example, with Kevin Harvick, oh, he's going to turn up. He's going to turn around. He's going to run for top 3 eventually. We want to believe it. We've been saying the same thing about Brad week in and week out. And it just hasn't happened. And the difference between Brad and, for example, Kevin Harvick that we see in a whole, Darlington, statistically, granted, Brad Keselowski has more wins of recent. Kevin Harvick has done really, really good at Darlington. 5 of his last 6 races, Kevin Harvick's finished inside the top 5. And in fact, I'm pretty sure in all 5 of those, he's finished 2nd or 3rd. So for me, I'm more inclined and bought into a Kevin Harvick situation. However, now that we go through that aspect of the round 16, this is where the round of 12 comes to play. And again, you're going to see some guys. Again, I mentioned William Byron. I think this is where you see Byron fall out. I do believe that this is the round as well that we're going to see, unfortunately, Joey Logano go. I think that these are some tough tracks where points are tight. And again, Logano's had a lot of success in the playoffs in the past. But Penske overall, outside of Ryan Blaney, in my opinion, has been a bit mediocre. And I really think that Penske needs a opportunity to really prove themselves for the future, if that makes sense. And this could be something motivating by not having as much success as they truly dreamed of. Kurt Busch, I think this is the round where he gets eliminated ultimately. And for Kurt, again, first round, really, really nice for him. I think that Kurt Busch has a lot of opportunity within the round of 12. But, or I should say in the round of 16, but the round of 12, not having a track like Atlanta, for example, that served him well. For me, the fact that he's made it this far, really, really good. But it's probably around a farewell right there. Again, I think Kurt Busch is going to have a great end to the season. He's been good, but I'm just not really bought into that fact. This is also where I see Christopher Bell going. I think Christopher Bell, let's be honest, not really a favorite, but outside of Darlington, these short tracks are really good for him early on. So I think he's going to have a really solid round of 16, but round of 12, right around the brink. He's been up and down all season. A lot of guys have him out in around the 16, but I truthfully think that he can get past that round of 16. So I think Christopher Bell's going to go here. Now, the final 8 that you're going to see, this is where it gets a little bit up and down, because obviously we saw how close it was last year. You saw guys have great seasons, have it fall apart. I think Denny Hamlin, he's out in the round of 8. Alex Bowman, gone in the round of 8. Chase Elliott, gone in the round of 8. Again, we mentioned Chase. He had his championship run, but at the end of the day, no one, in my opinion, has been better for Hendrick than Kyle Larson. And, for Chase, again, sure, he could try to find a sneak himself in the way in the Final Four. But the thing Chase Elliott had last year was he had a lot of bonus points to also play to his favor. Not as much, of course, compared to Denny Hamlin or Kevin Harvick. But Chase Elliott had a lot of bonus points to play with that really benefited him, even though he was in a hole and turned around and obviously won the final 2 races. But overall, I think that you've seen this 5 car continuously out-duke the 9 this season. And the 9's been really up and down too. Just for example, like Bowman and Byron, you could say the 9's had his ups and his downs. Mm-hmm. And recently, especially through the road course span, Chase has found his hot streak. The question is he going to fade a little bit? That's the tough question to ask. But ultimately, in a Final Four where it's going to be ultimately competitive, I think again you see both him and Bowman out. And if I'm trying to think who else we have left in my Final Four, I'm trying to figure out who my other. Did I say Kevin Harvick? Yeah,
I think Harvick's still alive in your world.
Harvick's still alive. So there's a Harvick round of 8. That's why I'm trying to make sure I didn't say Harvick, because so I have Harvick, Denny out in the round of 8 as well as Bowman and Chase.
So you're down to Larson, Truex, Kyle Busch, and Blaney.
For the Final Four. Now, Martin Truex Jr., let's be honest, not maybe everyone's top pick, but Truex is a good playoff driver. There's some really good tracks for him here. And I really think he's had a really solid under-the-radar season, won a few races, and has been consistent. Kyle Busch, to me, of the guys that used to be in the big 3, he's a permanent fixture in the playoffs of being consistent when it matters. I really think Kyle Busch can put together a good run to get Gibbs their second Final Four spot. Now, of course, you had Duke Penske. That's where I feel, again, Logano, Keselowski lagging. Ryan Blaney, again, I feel like this is his year. It just simply is his year to make the Final Four. Doesn't mean he's going to win a championship, but he's proven now that he can get it done. The only thing standing in his way, and granted, he had a fluke win because MTJ and Jimmy Johnson wrecked each other in the final lap in the first Roval race. But Ryan Blaney, the Roval has not been one of his best tracks. There's also a couple tracks like Richmond in the playoffs that have not been one of his best tracks. But I think the fact of the matter is that he's going to face a lot of his barriers and tracks he struggles at really, really early. Mm-hmm. And the fact that he has some bonus points are going to help him. So that being said, I think Blaney could come to life. You also have to remember, too, Talladega. If you're not picking Denny Hamlin, you're probably picking Ryan Blaney to win that race. So there's a lot to go with it. But Ryan Blaney right now is the hottest driver in NASCAR, in my opinion. Doesn't mean he wins a championship. Not exactly, but again, you can't count him out in the Final Four. And again, really, if I'm being honest, anyone right now having this Final Four, you can really interchange as champion. Granted, Kyle Larson has had the best season, no denying. But let's also not be shy to how the Final Four works. Because, again, anyone that has the best race, anyone can surprise you. And in an unexpected season, it would not surprise me if the most unexpected driver of that Final Four, for example, an MTJ or Kyle Busch, can win the championship. Because that's what NASCAR has been, unfortunately. Chase Elliott, let's be honest, granted playoffs, he earned it, but going into the playoffs would not have been picked as the most deserving champion over a Kevin Harvick or Denny Hamlin. You look, for example, Ryan Newman, runner-up all the way back from when this system first started. Would you really said he's a deserving champion? Yeah, had he won only one race, that being the championship race? So, again, a lot of things can happen. But I truthfully do think Kyle Larson is going to seal another Hendrick championship. And it is really, really hard for me to see people not beat this 5 team. I mean, everywhere you go, and really, this is the first time in a while for Hendrick, where every single track you go, the number one target every single week you can pick to win a race, 36 races out of the year, is Kyle Larson. And that's not very often. Of course, Kevin Harvick, Denny Hamlin, for example, will utilize them from last year. So I mentioned them 100 times already. But you couldn't pick them at every track. There's other guys that you could say, wow, they may be better than these guys. There is not a single track we've gone to, road course, oval, no matter what it was, even dirt, that you go to this season where you say, wow, Kyle Larson is not the favorite to win this race. So with that being said, yeah, typically the favorite has a lot of bad luck, might I add. It's happened every year. But it's Kyle Larson. This guy's been nothing but consistent. He ran down Denny Hamlin for a regular season championship. He found ways to be consistent, run top 5 nearly every week. And let's be honest, the man should have won a lot more races than what he actually won. Coda should have had a victory there. Atlanta, yeah, Ryan Blaney ran him down, but had he not got tangled with lap cars, he probably would have won there. That's only 2 instances. There's a lot more. Indy, another one. I mean, let's be honest, too. The man could have probably won the Daytona 500 had he just not slightly got tangled up. In that last lap crash, you never know. He was right around the mix there with Michael McDowell. So I do genuinely think, might I add, Daytona road course. Totally forgot about that. Remember, he crashed from the lead. Mm-hmm. So the fact of the matter is, though, Kyle Larson's the number one target everywhere he goes. If he has bad luck, again, wouldn't surprise me. Typically happens to the top dog some point in the playoffs. But Kyle Larson's going to win maybe 3, maybe 4, maybe 5 races this playoffs. He's going to dominate. That's just my utter opinion. Again, anyone can win the championship. But Kyle Larson's that guy that you have to beat. And these drivers are going to have to step up to the occasion. But as always, expect the unexpected, because that's what's happened every time this season.
Yeah, you never know what's going to happen when you enter the NASCAR playoffs. Just think about Kevin Harvick multiple times, 2018, 2020, best driver, and last year couldn't even make it into the Final Four. But Kyle Larson so far has kind of gone beyond what Kevin Harvick did these past couple of years. Like Tim said, he's been the favorite every week, and it's not false praise either. He's earned that title, and he's always a contender up there in the top 5 and leading a bunch of laps. But we shall see what happens as the playoffs kick off at Darlington next week here on Sports Speak. It's a big time NFL season preview. Lot to dive into as the NFL kicks off Thursday night, of course, with Cowboys Bucks, and then the full slate next Sunday. So great to see football back, a football Sunday. NFL every Sunday now until February 20th. Crazy to think we've finally come to the football season. But that's all for Sports Speak today. We hope you enjoyed. A thank you to Zoe Alter for joining us earlier to talk some baseball and football. But signing off, I'm Eddie Kalegi.
And I'm Tim Moore.
And this is Sports Speak. We hope you have a great rest of your Labor Day weekend.